You guys have been absolutely killing it with support over here. So I wanted to make my return and make an impact. But I couldn't figure out how to go about it, particularly. Do I just pick up where I left off? Do I do some sensationalist headline? I settled eventually on simply just playing the game and seeing what I can come up with. And it led to a rather interesting discovery. You see, I love this franchise. It quite literally was my childhood, and if things keep going the way they are, it might even become my future. So, as with all criticism these days, I've got to preface it with I don't hate this game. I'm going to continue playing it. I just keep running into and seeing these same glaring issues cropping up over and over and over again. And with Guild Wars 3 in production, which I'm going to cover from start to finish, the chances these fundamental flaws get addressed will be pushed to the next game, which could just carry them on if the concerns aren't even seen, let alone addressed. So, what am I talking about anyways? How can an MMO's core interaction principle be completely flawed? Well, let's go back in time, shall we? To release Guild Wars 2. Now, I can only assume, through industry fluctuations, that most of the team that launched the game have moved on to other projects, maybe even Guild Wars 3. But they had a fundamental philosophy at that time that was the big push they were going for. They were going to do away with the Holy Trinity. It was the big tagline: no healers, no tanks, we're all some variation of DPS. Now, I'm sure they figured this would lead to an innovation revolution, allowing them to shepherd a new era of MMO gameplay. But if the shepherd isn't listened to by his sheep, he just becomes an idiot with a stick. Because they forgot to account for one factor: player familiarity. Or comfort picks, as most people will put it. Healers and tanks don't exist because we conjured them out of thin air. They facilitate a necessary role created by the environment of combat itself. Someone's gonna get hit and need their health bar replenished. I know, deep ideas. So as people got to the top-end content on original Guild Wars 2, of which there was only really dungeons, people realized that you only really needed 4 DPS, and the might-granting support build wound up yielding more damage across the board than if you were to bring a 5th DPS. And if that doesn't make sense, it's simple math. One player can do 100% damage, or 4 players with a 30% boost can do 120% damage. And that's just with might. Obviously, made up numbers relatively, but might's even stupider than that, since it grants both condition and power damage. Meaning 4 Celestials and a might generator would just meme the entire game, as people quickly figured out. Now, the freeform nature of the time meant it wasn't necessarily a requirement to play support. But if a group of 4 had a free spot and a DPS took it, people weren't particularly enthused. Now, ArenaNet eventually saw this and decided to backpedal on it in their first expansion, Heart of Thorns, introducing the Druid as a dedicated healer. Even though Point Blank Shot with that Entangling Roots bullshit on Disable led to some very hilarious PvP moments back in the day where I just mowed people down with rapid fire. And then Chronomancer, which somehow wound up tanking. Yeah, I still don't understand that one. But by now, the damage had been done, because the classes had been designed with this fundamental philosophy in place. Now, let's look back even further, and then I'll get to the point of the whole video. Guild Wars 1. God, I'm fucking old. Prophecies. Some of my fondest memories of gaming, as it was some of the most innovative gameplay around at the time. And there's a whole argument to be made about how MMOs and old MMOs have a advantage of the fact they were the only things really available at the time. Like, if World of Warcraft launched today, I don't even know that you could, expect it to do what it's done. Maybe the same thing with Guild Wars as well, because there's just so many more options now. But that's a whole different video that I might make eventually. Anyways, with the multi-classing system, you're able to cover all of your external weaknesses, but also be balanced around not being entirely too broken. This is with the start of Prophecies, that is, when we just had the basic couple of classes, and it was relatively simple. You had the iconic Frenzy Mending, for example. Frenzy increasing your damage taken, and Mending granting you healing over time for when you did get hit. It was also a troll build, but it fits the example relatively well. Warriors, the tanks of Prophecies, had a limited energy bar, meaning that even if you did want to subclass into a spellcaster, you'd be heavily restricted on what you could cast. Couple that with Elementalist's exhaustion mechanic, and both of my parents playing Warrior Elementalists got pretty interesting pretty quickly. Now, the reason I bring this up is Guild Wars 1 eventually broke the philosophy of what was even possible in the first place. Prophecies, we started with warriors up front, being healed by monks and supported by spellcasters and rangers. And by Eye of the North, assassins were invincible. And no, I'm not kidding, Shadow Form literally made you invincible. Now, this was due to the vast array of skills at players' disposal by this point, meaning you could make just about any type of fantasy character you could imagine. So logically, Guild Wars 2 tried to create a version of this system with enough depth to be interesting, but enough pigeonholes that you couldn't go off the rails. And it worked until we discovered Bunker Druid. But I digress. So what's the problem then? I'd say it's that nothing lines up with what you'd expect it to line up with. And if you don't understand what I mean by that, I have a question for you regarding Guild Wars 2. What's the most spellcaster feeling class in Guild Wars 2? I'll give you a second to think about it. Is it Elementalist? Is it Mesmer? It's Necromancer, and it's not even remotely close. The most Archer feeling class. If my comment sections are to be believed, it's Longbow Untamed, which is a whole other problem I'll address later. And finally, the most iconic of all, the Sword and Shield Fighter. The Sword and Shield Warrior, even, from Guild Wars 1. 100 Blades Warrior was my childhood. And there's nothing like it in Guild Wars 2. Because someone looked at the most iconic weapon set in history and said, let's make it a Condi weapon. I can't, man. I don't get it sometimes. So here's where it all culminates, alright? You want to play something familiar? You want to jury rig it together? Mage, full fire staff elementalist. Wait, that's counterintuitive to the class design that's meant to switch between stances and use multiple elements, even though in Guild Wars 1 it wasn't designed like that at all because you could use different elements, but they all played together in the same spellcaster principles. Okay, well, Mesmer's a spellcaster, right? Yeah, well, Mesmer holds up until you realize all of the clones despawn once you kill your target, and suddenly you're playing a button masher trying to respawn all of your clones. Yeah, it's not great. Well, full Firestaff Elementalist is still the way most people want to play it. Sword Shield Fighter? Well, Revenant can dance around you like an invincible prick, and Guardian got movement locked until last year, and Warrior is a disgrace, let's just put it that way. Also, why don't we have great axes? Oh, skin your hammer! Eat my entire ass. It's like how Path of Exile managed to launch an action RPG without fucking swords. You want to play a range DPS focused class? Okay. Ranger. But over the years, we won't give you rifle nor pistols. But hey, you can throw a spear now because we arbitrarily gave it to everyone. You look less and less like the shepherd you tried to be all those years ago, and more like an idiot with a stick with every misshapen class identity choice. You couldn't give me marksman with a rifle and 2 pets. No, that makes sense. We can't have that, but we'll give Deadeye a rifle. We'll give Thief a rifle. You know, I picked Thief so that I wouldn't have to heal, and the same expansion I decided I was done healing, they gave me Spectre. Cock and ball torture, I tell you. Now, don't get me wrong, there's entirely something to be said about the uniqueness of Guild Wars 2's system, but that same uniqueness I see is what keeps turning people away, as it has a lack of comfort pick accessibility, proven by the fact that the day I write this, browsing Reddit, I saw both a how do I make Elementalist feel like a mage, and does anyone have a sword shield build? Of course, that's not the inspiration, I've felt this over a plethora of years by now, but it's this lack of innate understandability that ties in perfectly with the crux of the problem. Weapon swapping. Now this is going to be a divisive take. Weapon swapping is a horrible mechanic, thematic-wise, and an amazing one, utility-wise. As a shaman player at heart, having the ability to deal with everything on demand is always nice, but as someone who over the years has moved more away from power gaming and more into thematic builds, the stranglehold weapon swapping has over how you build in Guild Wars 2 can't be understated, because it becomes fundamentally unoptimal to camp your specific weapon set. Yes, now there are some builds that allow you to do this, such as my longbow ranger that you can find on the channel, or fire staff elementalist that you can jury rig to work. But in the grand scheme of things, they'd be considered niche ways to play that only functionally work in open world, unless you're a nuthouse like me who runs longbow and tier 100 fractals, and thusly creates the problem. The comfortable ways to play are the unoptimal ways to play. I've played just about every class, and nearly every elite spec in Guild Wars 2. And universally, if you aren't playing like a button-mashing crackhead, you're going to be underperforming. Use all these weapon skills, then swap weapons, and dump all those skills, and by the time you're done with that previous weapon set, the other one should be off cooldown, so then you switch back to that, and you throw in some garbage utility skill that you press once in a blue moon to make it feel like you have some relevance in your gameplay, but not a fun utility skill that does cool things, because those are all undertuned. No. We want animationless stun breaks, or on-demand buffs, because anything that takes away from your weapon swap spamming is suboptimal. And it just starts to feel like Guild Wars 2 was built on a house of cards that just keeps building upwards rather than revisiting its foundations. And I hope that in Guild Wars 3, they can overhaul and address both the accessibility and balance issues the system they created in the first place causes. Don't ever make a mage a stance character, and whoever decided to make Warrior Sword a Connie weapon should genuinely quit game design and become a monk, because they need a lesson in balance.